Hello, I'm Ken Morrison. I'm here with Professor Greg Clark. We're talking about how we make Australia's cities great. We've commissioned Professor Greg Clark to do a piece of work to look at just that aspect. And one of the things we asked Greg to do was benchmark Australia's largest cities with other cities around the world. Greg, what cities did we choose and why did we choose those ones?
Well, Ken, you asked me actually a very difficult question, which was to find groups of cities that were really relevant for Australia, and also to find groups of cities which Australian cities were not routinely compared with before. So we thought about this very carefully and we came up with what we hope is an interesting answer for your members and your stakeholders. So firstly, we identified the Canadian cities and the German cities as two national groups where there are 5 dominant cities, as there are in Australia, but where high levels of population growth and economic transition are playing out. So we picked them. Then we tried to look for other cities where there's been similar kinds of growth and change, and we identified the 5 key Scandinavian cities and 5 cities in the southwest of the USA. Cities that, if you like, have the same kind of climate as Australia and have the same interests in the tourism and the knowledge economies. And then we wanted to make sure that we were including high population growth, smart Asian cities. So we picked 5 cities in Asia as well. So there are 25 cities in the benchmark study. We systematically compare the 5 leading Australian cities with them, and we do it using benchmarks and indices drawn from 350 different comparative studies.
Okay, so Australian-sized cities with which are well understood and lessons to learn from for us. So what did we learn from those cities?
Well, we learned firstly that although Australian cities have high population growth rates, they're by no means outliers globally, and the Canadian cities are actually growing faster. The Scandinavian cities are growing nearly as fast, and the Asian cities are actually growing faster than the Australian cities as well. So Australian cities are not alone, and lessons learned from these other groups of cities are relevant for them. Most importantly, I think that we learned that we can see Australian cities performing as a group in relation to these other groups of cities. So we get some insights here, not just into how individual cities like Melbourne or Brisbane or Perth or Adelaide or Sydney perform, but how Australian cities as a team perform against these other teams of cities.
And what about the balance between how we're perceived and how we actually perform? What was the insight there?
Well, this is really the big insight, Ken, that if you like, Australian cities have been performing extremely well in all of these global benchmarks, particularly when it comes to measures of attractiveness, brand appeal, livability, where Australian cities have that famous Australian lifestyle offer, places which are great to visit, places which have expanding higher education opportunities, particularly in relation to the Asian market for higher education, and cities that are broadly renowned as great places to invest, great places to visit, great places to study. Australian cities do very well in all of those measures.
I hear a but coming.
Well, there is a but, Ken, because what the benchmarks are now beginning to do is to measure not just the attractiveness of cities, but how well they're performing in relation to the mega trends and the disruptors that we've spoken about before. And so they're beginning to measure Australian cities, for example, on how well are they managing population growth, how well are their infrastructure systems responding, how efficient is their land use, how good is their ability to translate their knowledge economy into an innovation economy? How well are they doing in relation to the systematic organization of the city, the creation of great systems of transport, for example? In all of those measures, Australian cities are performing less well than the rest of the cohort that we've compared them against. And we're concerned because we think increasingly comparative studies of cities are going to focus not just on these attractiveness measures, but on the management measures. So to put it very simply, the brand of Australian cities at the moment is better than the product. And we know that a business can only sustain that for a certain period of time before customer dissatisfaction and negative comment begins to come.
Okay, so our brand is better than our product, and the things that we're being compared to other cities on are the things that we are not as good as other cities. So this is a big wake-up call for Australia, isn't it?
This is a wake-up call for Australia and for Australian cities, and if you like, the message that I'm obliged to give is that over the next 10 years, the judgment about Australian cities will be increasingly challenging and critical in these areas of how well Australian cities are managing the challenges of the metropolitan century.
So there you go, a wake-up call for Australia. Thanks very much, Greg. If you'd like to read more about how we create great Australian cities, and you can see the full report that Greg's done for the Property Council on our website. And if you'd like to join the conversation, then please do so. Use the hashtag #GreatCities. Thanks very much for joining us.